Buenas tardes, me da mucho gusto saludarles. Bueno, se trata de la cuarta conferencia del profesor Mauro Tosco que vamos a escuchar hoy. El profesor Mauro Tosco es profesor de lingüísticas africanas del Departamento de Humanidades de la Universidad de Turín, Italia, y actualmente es investigador visitante en el Centro de Estudios de Asia-África, el Colegio de México. El profesor ha publicado un gran número de artículos y libros. Está comentando que está preparando un artículo sobre language in the constitutions of Africa, a preliminary survey and a few considerations. Se publicará después en el libro Multilingualism, Identity and Language Endangerment in Africa, editado por Kutoba y Koranki, y se publicará en Nueva York. El profesor Mauro Tosco va a hablar hoy sobre Somalia and the Somali language, an introduction. Este tema es uno de los temas de sus trabajos de campo y sí sería muy interesante. Bueno, entonces el profesor, por favor, adelante.
Muchas gracias, Tommy, muchas gracias a todos, a todas. Y gracias. Yes, I want to start this fourth and last presentation. The general theme, I think, has been possible convergence as possible points of contact between linguistics and other fields of research, and in particular social studies, but also cognitive sciences. This last one, today's talk, is in a way more specific because it deals with only one country, Somalia, and one language, Somali. I want to show that what happens to language and with language is determined in great part by the history and by the politics and ideology. So it's not really about linguistics. We cannot do an introduction to Somali language or a course in Somali in a couple of hours, but we can, I think, say something interesting about how the culture, as I said, is shaped by geography and by history. And if you allow me, I start sharing my presentation. I hope you see it. Yes. Okay, and that's just the title. First part is really, you will see a lot of maps. As maybe you know, I love maps a lot, and I think that in this case it's interesting and important to know not only where Somalia is, everybody knows that, but how it is internally, and the unity and the diversity, and that's actually the title of the first part. What you see here is nothing special. It's just an old map. It's very old because it depicts the surface of the Somali Democratic Republic, which to all practical effects, even officially, ceased to exist in December 1991. It is more than 30 years ago. You see that Somalia, as you know, is not only in the Horn of Africa, but actually is the very tip of the Horn. This is the tip and also the easternmost point of Africa. You see other typical features of many African countries. For example, you see a kind of borders that in many cases is geometrically shaped. That is, it was done by somebody, foreign colonial powers, but not only, because there is Ethiopia, which was a real African state. But in any case, if you see this kind of borders, it's very probable that it was not done with an eye to the linguistic, ethnic, cultural differences on the surface. It was simply done by somebody else and imposed upon the people in the country. The divisions also internal to the country, which I remember was called the Somali Democratic Republic, are the divisions of the regions. They were called the regions of Somalia, of the Somali Democratic Republic, until 1991. You still see a lot of these both regions, borders, and a lot of these maps. They have nothing to do with the situation nowadays, end of 2022, after more than 30 years. I don't know actually very much about the political and situation today, except what I read from both Somali and foreign sources. Let's say that very recent, but actually it's also this 1 year ago, end of 2021, is something like this. Basically, what you have is that there is no unified country. There is no country called Somalia. On the map, there is something which is called the federal Somali Republic, yes, which is the capital is Mogadishu. But you see that there are many different things. For example, there is a strange situation in the north. There is a country called Somaliland in the northwest, and the name itself, not always the border, but the name itself is taken from the colonial administration. That is, it was the name of a British colony until 1960, the year of independence. And then there is a lot of divisions and a lot of forces, Islamist forces, many other divisions that are not really linked to politics or political ideology, religion. You see that there are many parts of the country that are here in red or pink, which are where the Islamist groups are based. Many of these divisions actually are based upon the clans or the tribes, so-called. This is another map I presented because in Somali you have, well, some kind of the picture of the clans of the country, but there is something before that is something more interesting. This map here, the main one, the big one, shows a very important fact that the Somali people and the Somali language, if you want to speak about the language, is not limited at all to Somalia. It's an area, it has an area much bigger, a much wider area. Basically, it's in Somalia, if anything like this exists, but also in a part of Djibouti. Djibouti is an independent country, former French colony, in quite a big chunk of Ethiopia, that is the east part of Ethiopia, the northeast part of Kenya, that is at least 5 different countries: Eritrea, Ethiopia, Kenya, and then, sorry, 1 country, but 2 different colonial powers. We are going to talk about this in a moment. That is the British and the Italians in the center and south. There is an old legend actually about the 5 points of the star in the Somali flag, and the 5 points would represent the 5 parts of the country, with a few of these parts still to be liberated and put together in a single state. This is very interesting because in this case, we see that one single ethnic group actually occupies not only one country, and this is already very strange and very rare in Africa. Normally we have multi-ethnic and multilingual countries, not only in one country, but also out and to a big extent out of this country itself. Irrespective of the division, internal division, we are going to talk a bit about the internal division, but the important thing about all this part of the Horn of Africa is that it's very much unified and uniform, and actually quite boring from a linguistic and ethnic point of view, because it's a huge expanse of land with only one language, official language, one language, and a few minorities. We're going to talk about this in a moment, but basically we have a situation in which an African country is much more uniform in ethno-linguistic terms, not only than almost all the other African countries, maybe with the exception of Swaziland and a few other parts of South Africa, not only of many African countries, but only, I would say, of most countries in the world, certainly of American countries and of European countries. So Somalia is really 99% Somali, of Somali language, of Somali culture. This is a physical map, and I drew somehow in red two rivers. I'm going to talk a little bit more about geography, sorry, because these rivers are very important, not only in geographic terms, but also in ethnic, linguistic, political terms. More or less, these two rivers, the Juba to the south and the Webe Shabelle, which goes, by the way, flows a little bit to the north and inland of Mogadishu. As you see, they more or less divide an area which is to the south of the country, but not not the southernmost part of the country. This area is the area between the two rivers, the inter-riverine area, and is the area where the diversity is concentrated. This is interesting from an ecological point of view, an economic point of view, because we have to ask ourselves, how is it that this part is where division and difference is concentrated? Basically, yeah, you see, okay, this is a satellite picture. The colors, of course, are the colors of satellite pictures, so don't trust them. It's not so green, but in any case, we see that there is, you see that there is a plain in this part of the country. By the way, the coast is not green at all. It's mainly desertic, and it's desertic because the river flow and disappear inland. This is the area of much division in the country. This is another satellite map, and instead here you have, well, you have all the tip of the Horn of Africa, and you see that it's mainly arid, desertic, which means not only, as you know, that you have much lower rainfall, but also that the ecology of the area allows for a much lower presence of human presence and human diversity. So it's quite common that desertic areas are much more uniform than densely inhabited areas. You can also imagine that in the desertic areas, okay, this is another picture of an aerial picture of the Juba River, and here you see a typical picture of a densely green and densely, well, in a way, cultivated part of the world. Cultivated is important because it means that we have agriculture. Another picture, in this case of the Webe Shabelle, if I am correct. And we can confront this with a picture from the center and north part of the country, which is completely different habitat. you already know what is going to happen. It's going to happen that, again, a picture of the northern part of Somalia, and it could be also Djibouti, of course. This is a picture of the population density, and you see that there are parts of the north that are virtually uninhabited, and that there are parts, especially here along the rivers, here you see again the rivers, that are moderately populated in general terms, but we can say that in the east of Africa, they are densely populated. They are along the rivers and in other parts, but always mostly in this part of the country. So what is going to happen in this part of the country? Look at this map. I promise that this is probably the last map. It's a map about the clans. We are not going to talk about the clans and the clanic system and the clanic law, which is actually central to whatever the Somali do and speak about, because it's always a matter of being a member of a clan, even when you say your name, for example. But you can just see that well, most of the colors, that is, most of the differences are again in this part of the country. Yes, there is some difference here, but again, there is a huge part of the country, north, the center, the Ethiopic part, even to the south, even in Kenya, that is one color, that is a big clanic family. There is some division, but most of the division is here, concentrated here. What happens? Okay, it was not the last map. This is the last map. This is the type of map that we linguists use, because in these maps, this is a map of the Summer Institute of Linguistics, and usually they are very interesting, this kind of maps, because they are very rich. You have many different language families. Maybe I showed you the map of Ethiopia. They even have two different maps, one specifically for the southwest, because it would be too much to put in a single map all the diversity of 70 or 80 different languages of the country. But here, just look at Somalia. There is almost nothing. You have a single color almost everywhere. You have, it's true, 2 or 3 points colored in green. Green means Bantu. Green means a few Bantu minorities. Very interesting from a historical. Some of them are former slaves who took refuge in the interior of the country. Some of them are interesting also from an historic and ethnic and linguistic point of view. The town of Brawa, I mentioned Brawa in the last talk. They are concentrated here along the coast, mainly along the coast of the south. Interesting, but from a demographic and therefore political and therefore whatever you want, they count for nothing. They are maybe 1% of the population. So what you have for the rest is a single color, but still within this single color, you have a few words written here and a few borders. And these borders, we discussed these borders in the last talk, correspond to clans and to dialects that are a bit different. What is interesting today is not, of course, the dialects and the language, but the ecological, economic, and political division within this area. There was a classification of Somali dialects proposed by Marcello Lamberti in 1983. There were 5 groups with some doubts even by the author. And the interesting thing, in my opinion, is that we can put together, okay, there was first and second, we can call them Central Northern. Then we have the other groups. And the interesting thing is that most of the country is Central Northern from a linguistic point of view. And Central Northern means that they are pastoral varieties. Pastoral from an economic and social point of view, that is, they are mainly camel breeders. You cannot breed cows in most of the country. In the south, and only in the south, in this rivers region, you have rural varieties. That means people who have agriculture, who are agriculturalists, and who are cattle breeders, cow breeders, that is, live in a different kind of environment. You also have a few urban varieties which are again in the south and again in the same area, because it's the area where most people live and where most, even Mogadishu, lies. So even from an economic point of view, economics tallies, goes with linguistics, because the same dialects are spoken. The dialects are spoken either by pastoral varieties or by non-pastoral, or let's say non-camel breeder varieties, that is cow, cattle, or agricultural varieties. So there is a very neat, and it matches, let's say, maybe not 100%, but really it's very detailed and precise, this opposition. Okay, there are different words, Somali words about, they make a distinction between, with the strange words, between the language of the pastoralists and the language of the non-pastoralists, and of course the clans of the pastoralists and the clans of the non-pastoralists, and also of course about the even physical anthropology. So this multi-tiered opposition is both linguistic, ethnic, because they make a basic distinction between the putative descendants of the Somali, who was called Somali, and is the father of all the Somali people, and the sub. The sub are, well, being a sub is not a good thing in Somalia. It's being a member of the outcast or low caste clans. Of course, is the pastoral, who are high, and the agriculturalists who are low. Also economic and ecologic, I repeat, because the center north, the true Somali, the descendants of Somali are herders, they are nomads, so there is no, actually there is no fixed position apart from wealth and certain portions for breeding, but they don't have a fixed position on the map, while the farmers and the sedentary, of course, have a fixed position on the map. They are not nomads. If they are on a very limited basis, always within this quite limited riverine that is between the rivers area. And maybe I can skip all this, but you have already seen this in another presentation. You see again that much of the division, you are maybe fooled by the different colors, which are a bit of an artifact in order to show the division of the dialects. But remember that this green, this red, and also the blue are very, very similar, while the yellow and the different colors seen in this part are very different, and some of them maybe are different languages. 3 dialect families out of 5 are concentrated in the south, and we have seen, and I repeat for the last time, that this is also where we have ecological, economic difference between in respect to all the rest of the country. Okay, this is a blow up of the same map, where you see that this group interact among themselves in this yellow colored part of the country, which is the area between the 2 rivers. The 2 rivers are not shown here because it's just a linguistic map. Of all the names here, Afmai, Afgaljal, Af Ogaden, etc., simply means language. Af is mouth and language, and Ogaden, all these names are, of course, clanic name. That is, names of clans. That is, that somebody who belongs to Ogaden speaks the Ogaden dialect, even if he happens to live in Mogadishu, here, or anywhere in the world, even in Mexico. Okay. Now that we have this general introduction to Somali and to Somalia, and from an ethnic and ethnic point of view, we can talk a little bit about the recent history of the country with colonization, what happened after colonization, and how this is related to the Somali language. The map to the left is the same that you have seen just at the beginning. It is a map of the extension and diffusion of the Somali-speaking people, of course, in the Horn of Africa, not considering the huge diaspora of maybe a few million people in Europe and in North America. To the right, instead, you have an old colonial map, which shows the area where the Somaliland British protectorate was. You see more or less, if you remember, the same border of nowadays. This was the Italian Somaliland, or Somalia. That was the tip and the center and the southernmost part of the country. That is, much of the country was Italian, actually. By the way, this was the French Somaliland. It was called Somaliland because the majority of the population is Somali. So here you have an historic picture of an historic view of the same picture that you have on the left. This is a map from the end of the 19th century. We cannot do, of course, here the history of Africa that you know better than me, but you already know what happened, that when in 1960 most of Africa became independent, also Somalia became independent, and the very same day, actually in one day, the former Italian Somalia and the former British Somaliland became the Somali Republic. It was the 1st of July of 1960. This did not happen with Ethiopia, which was an independent country and didn't want, of course, to give anything to Somalia, neither to the French, because the French Somaliland was not part of the agreement to give part of the country to form the new Somali state. What all this has to do with language and with material culture. The basic thing that you have to remember is that, yes, this is an Islamic country, probably since at least 1 millennium or at least 1,000 years. So probably much older Islam here than in much of West, for example, Western Central Africa. But there is no use, or a very marginal use of, is Ajami. Ajami is a general term for saying Arabic writing. That is the fact that in much of, for example, West Africa, but also East Africa, writing is quite old. It was done in Arabic writing for writing the local African languages. Great examples of this are Wolof in Senegal, are Hausa in Nigeria, and of course Swahili along the coast of East Africa, along the coast of Kenya and Tanzania. And you can ask how is it that in another part of Africa where Islam is at least as old probably even older, there is no documentation of the use of the Arabic script in order to write the language. And we don't know, we cannot have a definite time, but probably, but we can give a good guess. The fact is that this is basically an nomadic society. There are very few, if any, physical implements. You don't have towns, you don't have a hierarchical society. You have a very egalitarian society in which different clans, some of them very small, interact among themselves in this huge desert that is much of Somalia. Probably you don't have a writing of Somali or of Somali in Arabic script, just as you don't have much writing in Arabic itself, because you don't need much writing at all. This is a nomadic country, and really you don't have you don't have any implements. I mean, also the calabashes and the earthenware that the Somali nomads use are not done by themselves, because they don't have the notion, the capacity, the material, and the interest of doing them, of making them. They buy them from outside. So really, the material culture is pretty much limited to a nomadic house, which is a hut that can be mountain and dismounted, and is property of the wife, by the way, not of the husband, and not much else. You cannot carry anything because you move along quite a huge stretch of land. You cannot carry anything. You don't have much use for writing. Another thing that we have seen is that there was, we have seen a small linguistic and small dialectal variation. It is quite uniform. A third thing, which maybe you think that it has nothing to do, but instead it has a role in the language, is there is a widespread use of a koine. A koine is a technical term for saying a mixture of different dialects used for certain domains and in certain domains of use. In particular, many koines are used in poetry. Poetry, of course, was always and only oral, and poetry was one of the occasions in which people from different clans met and interacted, sometimes fought together through poetry. Somali poetry is one of the big poetries of Africa in terms of quantity, in terms of technical organization and technical complexity, styles, rhymes, alliterations, all these kind of things. But it was, and still is to a large extent, oral poetry. Now let's talk about the colonial part of the linguistic picture. And let's skip for the moment Ethiopia and France, that is Djibouti. You have British Somaliland and you have Italian Somalia. That is, you have two, or maybe three, if you consider French, competing colonial written languages. And to the contrary, you have basically one single spoken language, that is Somali. This, in my opinion, is the most important peculiarity of Somalia in terms of language situation. Contrary to most African countries, there was more than one colonial power. There was Great Britain and there was Italian, and you can also add that there was the Amharic, Ethiopic, and French, but they are quite marginal. But you had English and Italian, and contrary to basically all the other African countries, you have a single spoken language. Of course, you have different clans and different dialects, but remember point 3, there is this Koine, that is a language which is mixed of the different dialects and which is accepted for certain uses by everybody. Pastoralists, cattle breeders, camel breeders, and so on and so forth. So the Somali language existed, but it was not written, and the written languages were English and Italian. What you have is that, okay, this has nothing to do. We can take a break looking a moment at this. You have one of the very few specimens of where Somali words are written on a tombstone alongside Arabic. And well, and something which actually relates to what we're going to say. That is, how are we going to cope with this situation? Italian and English used as written languages. This means used in the administration of the new Somali Republic starting July 1st, 1960, and one single language. We have different, and we're going to talk about this basically, we have different attempts to write Somali. One of the historically most interesting was developed actually before the Second World War in the 30s in what was then the Italian part of Somalia, also very much to the north. And it is an alphabet which has nothing to do with anything else. It's not based, as you see, on Arabic. It's not based on Latin script. It's not based upon the Amharic or Ethiopic syllabary. It's the invention of a single author called Osman Kenadid, and the writing is called Osmania. We always talk about this during my classes in African linguistics because we can discuss what are the advantages and disadvantages of inventing your own script. We cannot do it at length here, but you can, well, if I can suggest something, a pro of inventing, of having your own script is that you have a powerful symbol of identity. Imagine the Somalis. They knew that the Ethiopians had their syllabary and that Ethiopia is to the west. They know that the Arabs have their alphabet. It's probably the only alphabet they see a little bit when they see tombstones, or when they see the Quran, although they did not read the Quran, and so on and so forth. And then they had the colonial administrators, either Italian or English. They saw that they used one script, the Latin script. And so probably if you have your own script and you call it the Somali script, it's a very powerful means of creating and reinforcing your national identity, which was probably just then starting to arise. And then you have, of course, the negative points. The contrary points is that, well, how can you print this thing if you do not have typing machines in this writing? You do not have printing machines. You don't have anything, basically. You are obliged to use it on paper or not much else. That is, there are economic costs which are probably unbearable to any small language, small country in the world. So the Osmania script had a certain diffusion among the clan members of the founder, There is still somebody even nowadays that likes to use it, but it was rapidly forgotten after the Second World War. So something else arose. Let's recapitulate. There was no standard writing system. Okay, we had this Osmania that it was very basically, it was basically a single enterprise of a small group of people. There were three possible solutions. One is this autonomous script, that is Osmania, that is this invention by Osman Kenadid in 1932, if I am correct. Of course, you could use the Arabic script, not to write Arabic, but to write Somali, just like the Wolof did many centuries ago, the Hausa, the Swahili, but also the Kanuri and many other groups all over, especially West Africa. Arabic script was important because it certainly was linked in the eyes of the people to religion, to faith. The point is that there was no tradition of writing Somali in Arabic. Somebody knew Arabic and wrote Arabic, and we have a certain amount of production from Somalia, but of Arabic literature, that is literature in Arabic written by Somali. But there was no tradition of writing Somali. The Somali language is very different. There were a few attempts. Many people who supported the Arabic script actually made a confusion, because actually they supported the idea of saying, why do we need Somali? We can simply have Arabic as our national official language, and therefore to be part of the wider Arab and also in a way Islamic world. So let's forget about the local language, African language. Let's just use Arabic. The point is that, of course, the people do not know Arabic. And then there was the third solution, which was to use the Latin script, which was used by, colonial administrators, missionaries, officials, whatever, until 1960, and then it was used by a small part of the population, mainly busy in administration of the new republic. No decision was taken. No decision was taken in the 50s when, during the Italian administration, fiduciary trusteeship by the United Nations in order to prepare Somalia to independence, when there was a lot of very heated discussions about how to write Somali. And then in the first years of the independence, that is from 1960 to 1969, a lot of discussions, different parties, also political parties, having different proposals. Somebody collected 30 different proposals for writing Somali, most of them based upon the Latin script. There were a few problems in phonology, and then simply there was no political decision and no political will to solve the situation. No decision taken, and you can imagine the problems that this lack of a single written language, the problems that the lack of a single written language and the lack of a Somali written language caused to administration in the first years. It's not a joke, but it's true that in certain cases, people working in different offices in the administration of the Republic in Mogadishu were forced to use in one office English because they knew English, because they had learned English in the north. And when they passed the memo or the letter or the whatever, the draft of a law, whatever, it had to be translated because people in another office didn't know English because they had learned Italian. At the same time, when these people met physically in person, for example, out of the offices, they were perfectly able to speak and to converse among themselves because they were all Somali, of course, and in oral conversation, they used Somali. So it was quite comical in a way and a tragedy in another way. No solution until, as often happens, the military took on and gave the solution if you want it or if you don't want it. And the Latin script was adopted after the coup d'etat, after what was called a revolution, but actually it was a coup. The coup happened in 1969, in October 1969. Mohammed Siad Barre, who was a colonel, took the power. It was not that difficult because Mogadishu was basically a village, and the Somali army was basically a couple of tanks. So he moved the tanks and simply occupied the parliament. And one of the, according to many people, well, according also to me, maybe you agree with me, of the good things that the military revolutionary so-called government did was to solve the problem and to provide for an alphabet. And, well, not for a language, the language was there, but to provide for an alphabet. The Latin script was launched in the Revolution Day in October 72, and it became official on January 1, 1973. At the same time, Somali became the only official language. There was a massive literacy campaign. I have a couple of pictures in the next slides. There was at first a very limited and government-controlled written production. Of course, nowadays the situation is different because, especially since 1991, many things written in Somalia are written abroad, are written electronically. Somali is probably one of the most important African languages in electronic use, that is, on the net, also in the diaspora. Of course, this means, and this is how I would like to end my my presentation. All this having and implementing implementing Somali as the only official language of the country was very beautiful, very nice. It was very fascinating. I was a very young student of Somali things, of Somali and African things at the time. I was impressed. I joined in a way because I went to the country in the 80s, much later, but the interest in the thing, the enthusiasm was there. Now I realized that there were also negative effects, negative results of this thing. Let's discuss them one by one. Okay, these are a few pictures, not done by me, of course, much earlier, from the 1973. They are well widespread on the web, and of course they were much used by the propaganda of the regime. Basically what they did in 1973, early 1973, was to close all schools. There was no university in Somalia at the time. To close all the schools, to give crash courses in the new alphabet that I'm going to present in a moment to those who were already able to write, and to send everybody to the interior, to the bush, to the desert, among the tribesmen, to teach the new writing. And so to eradicate literacy and to enable everybody to write and read the new official language, written unified Somali language. For example, in this last picture at the bottom left, you have a typical situation in which somebody teaches how to write using a wooden board and some chalk, and not in a school, because of course there are no schools. You have elders listening to somebody coming from town and learning how to read and write the language. You have schools in which they write the alphabet, they learn the alphabet. All this is very heroic, very beautiful, very nationalistic. Okay, we can discuss it. But first I want to introduce the Somali alphabet. This is not of interest to you, you are not linguists. Let's say that is technically considered a success. It's a very good solution because, well, most signs have no problem. They use the Somali, the Latin script for A, for B, for D, and so forth and so forth. They cannot everything, but there is nothing new. In a few cases, they use what we call digraphs, that is a combination of two signs. For example, for sh, they used the English-based S and H. For h, they used, which have widespread solution, K and H. They have a specific sound, D, which is written on the same model with D and H. They have few problems that let's say, that were a problem for many linguists, for many even UN consultants. By the way, we don't know exactly who invented the alphabet. There had been a few United Nations commissions that had proposed solutions. Most of the solutions were accepted by the Somali government, the Somali military government, but probably they invented a couple of very genius solutions, that is the use of C in order to write this strange phonetic sign, which is a pharyngeal, which is found in Arabic and voiced pharyngeal. But of course, it's not found in European Latin-based script. And its counterpart, the genius in this solution was to use a few signs that were not needed for writing Somali otherwise. They had already used, looking at the keyboard, A, B, K, L, M, N, whatever. They realized at the end that a few signs that were on a typing machine were simply useless in order to write Somali. For example, they did not have any use for C. By the way, C has very different uses even in European scripts. And they decided to say, okay, let's use it for a totally different, and this is the genius, totally different things. We take the liberty to use this sign that already exists in the typing machines that we have, the very few that we have in Somalia, and we use it for something totally different, that is something which is which does not look at all to C as in Spanish, to chi as in Italian or whatever. The same thing they did with this sign, which is X. They didn't need X, and they used it for a kind of an H, but a different H, a pharyngeal H, that is sh. Believe me, this was a revolution, because it was sometimes it was the pattern, but it was the central idea that enabled many other African orthographies to be made. For example, in Ethiopia, they had different problems, but they used the same system. That is, let us use what is there, because we do not have the money to have our own writing machines, typing machines. We do not have the money to impose to Microsoft to write our own fonts. We do not have the money and the power to ask Apple to do keyboards nowadays with special signs. So we use what we find in the market, but we use to our own purposes. So the Somali alphabet was a story of success, a success story in African orthographies, in African literacy, if you want. We can discuss I have in mind the many negative effects, and maybe you have too. If you think that we have time, I can. Okay, let's skip this. Okay, the assessment is this: technically very good. It was highly accepted in the country because it's easy. It solves most problems of the language. After 1973, there has been a huge corpus development. Nowadays, we have in Somali, well, not as much as for Swahili, but Swahili has many more speakers. But you have written poetry, you have novels, you have newspapers, you have whatever you want. I didn't write anything about the negative points. I just wrote in brackets, but I think that maybe everything was done too quickly and in a rush, and the net result that we witnessed and the non-government organizations starting from the 80s witnessed is that there was a dramatic decrease of cultural of knowledge in a very basic sense. I would have many personal stories to say, but let's say that the idea was that also in the high school they had to use Somali, but the Somali government could not print books for high school. There were many problems also in the technical terms. Whatever was printed was very poor in terms of quality. At the same time, people, the very few people, there were few and always fewer people who knew an international language, that is English, but also, if you want to call it international, Italian or Arabic. So basically what happened at the university level is that the general level was very, very low. There were people who enrolled in a faculty of sciences and had never seen, for example, a human skeleton or even a depicted, drawn human skeleton. They didn't know what the solar system was and whatever. I mean, what I mean is that we can complain, and as linguists, we complain of the influence of English, French, and other major colonial languages in Africa. But we have to say that this is a window to the world and gives opportunity to know things that are very difficult to provide in such a poor country as Somalia. I remember that Somalia was and still is one of the 10 poorest countries in the world. When I was there in the 80s, late 80s, by the way, there was one single printing factory that printed everything, from the passports to the newspaper. The newspaper was only one, and it was the party newspaper, and it was 4 pages. I mean, it's very nice to write minority languages. I am a speaker of a minority language myself. But sometimes I wonder, yes, okay, we teach to write the minority language to everybody, but what would they do with it? What do these people do with the new Somali written language if there is nothing to read? in Somali. And this was the situation. There was nothing to read. Of course, you could read the party newspaper, that is the words of the president, but it's not very fun, believe me. And there would be a last thing, but I realized that we are out of time. That is by the way, there is a mistake here, so orthography with TH. The use of the Somali alphabet in other parts of East Africa, in Djibouti in particular, and in Eritrea, and the twists in the use of these special signs in different languages for political reasons. What happened, we don't give the example, we don't have time, but what happened basically is that when they wanted to write to have an alphabet for the language of Djibouti, north of Somali, a different language, they had the example of Somali, but in order to be different from Somali, they simply shifted the values of a few signs in order to make the language more different than they are. And it can be quite funny. For example, what you write with C and you pronounce ad, you pronounce always ad, actually you pronounce it ado, but you write with a Q. That is, the phonetic form is quite similar between the two languages, but the result is that in one case you use C, in one case you use Q, and you make the language totally different and incomprehensible. And you have the same thing for a few other signs. And I find this very telling and very interesting for the topic of the ideological use of writing, ideological use of orthography. That is quite important in Africa nowadays. But maybe we could rather concentrate, if you want, on the positive and negative sides of using and implementing an African language. Remember that also Swahili, which is the most widely used African language, even nowadays, after 60 years of being the official language of Tanzania, Swahili is not used in high school. And it's not used in the university in Dar es Salaam. It's used in primary and junior high schools, but in high school, they still use English, which is a bit disappointing to me, but it's a fact. And probably if they do it, because they evaluate that it would be a huge task to invent the words and to provide all the material for teaching, I don't know, algebra or astronomy or physics or chemistry or whatever in Swahili. And believe me, the same problems we have for Somali or for Wolof, if one day in Senegal they want to teach Wolof and whatever. So this is a big problem, I would say, in the applied linguistics of Africa. And the applied linguistics of Africa is exactly a topic in which we linguists, interact and must better interact with sociologists, anthropologists, and political scientists. Thank you very much, and I would stop it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauro, for your fantastic talk. It was very interesting for us. So, ¿tiene algún comentario o pregunta?
Did I stop the sharing? Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm never sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a simple question. If the Arabic language has been taught in the educational system of Somalia?
It has always been taught, and even nowadays is taught, but in religious schools. not as part of the official state curriculum. The state curriculum until 91, of course, had basically Somali. Those who wanted to enroll and pass the exam to go into the university sometimes took Italian, because the Italian Foreign Ministry was responsible for paying and assisting the Somali university. In the meantime, in the late 70s, the government had decided to make a Somali national university. So the Italian teachers were sent there and they taught in Italian. So many people learned a little bit of Italian, but in general, the level of English and Arabic, English and Italian was very low. Arabic, well, Arabic was known, is still known, but basically means that you know how to read the Quran. Does not mean that you learn to speak Arabic or to read a newspaper in Arabic. Everything is very much ideological, even there, even during the military government. Even nowadays, the constitution, there is a new constitution made a few years ago. They say Somali is the only official language of the country. We recognize the dialects. Now they accept that there are dialects, and in particular, they mention the language of the South, Mai. And then they say they do never mention English. Of course, Italian is forgotten and lost, but who cares about Italian? They never mention English, but they say Arabic is the second official language. And it's a bit funny because nobody knows Arabic, nobody uses actively Arabic. Of course, you know a lot, or you have a lot of writing in Arabic in the mosques, also privately. But it's part probably of politics. Somalia, as well as Djibouti, as well as Eritrea partially, are members of the Arab League. You know, the Arab League is the association of the countries in which Arabic is the official language. Well, they do it because they wrote in the constitution that Arabic is the second official language, and so they can have assistance, help from the countries of the Gulf and these kind of things. Does not mean that people actually speak Arabic. This is one part of the answer. The last part of the answer, but I don't know really anything about it, is what is happening now, because there is the civil war, but at the same time, there is a huge development of economic development, and also intellectual and cultural development. There are tens of private universities in Mogadishu. I am in contact with many of them. They are private universities, so you pay in order to enter the university. And what they typically do is that they boast, we teach in English, because people want to know English. Sometimes they say we teach in Arabic, because to know Arabic actually means that you can go and work in Saudi Arabia or the Gulf, which is a good opportunity. But again, how much does this involve the people at large? I don't know. In general, people do not know Arabic. No, do not. They respect Arabic. They can read. They can recite. They can read the Quran. But this is not to know Arabic.
Okay, thank you. Preguntas, comentarios.
Everything about these topics is a bit schizophrenic, in my opinion. But not only in Africa, also maybe always in the world. I'm now, as you know, I am reading, which is not a lot of fun. I am reading the constitutions of African countries, and you have a very nice and very beautiful sounding things. We respect all the language of the country. We want to promote and develop all the language of the country. Imagine Cameroon has 200 different languages. At the same time, the reality is that they use English and French, but they don't write it in the Constitution. They write these beautifully sounding sentences, which do not mean anything. I mean, it becomes a work of fiction. It becomes fiction, yes, what politicians say about languages. Okay, this of course is my private personal assessment of the situation, but I am happy to, sorry.
Are you planning to go back there? Someday.
To Somalia, I haven't planned because from the 90s, I've been working mainly in Ethiopia, which is much more interesting from a linguistic point of view. I plan to go back to Ethiopia next year, yes, in July next year, during my summer holidays. And yes, I will be involved there in language policy. That is, I will see what they are doing in developing an orthography for a small community in the south, not a national language, a small community. So no, I don't deal now with these things for Somalia actively. I mean, I don't plan to go back to Somalia or the Somaliland. They say it's possible to do it. I wouldn't be afraid of going there, but as I said, there are many more interesting field research areas, yeah, field work areas. But there are many interesting things similar to this. For example, I am happy that there are a few colleagues and a few anthropologists nowadays who investigate the use of African languages in development, and the use of, and a few non-government organizations, NGOs in Africa. In particular, I am in contact with one in Burkina Faso, and they, part of their work, they work with hospitals and people with disabilities, and part of their work is related to African languages, because they realized that sometimes they sent in the field nurses and doctors, and they could not communicate with the local people. And French was not enough and was not useful. And so now they plan to use the African languages in written and oral communication in the field. Yeah, this is one possible area of interaction.
Yeah, we have some questions in Facebook. And okay, yeah, somebody's, sent you a greeting from Guatemala City, great work. And our student Yoslan Silverio said, thank you very much, Professor. In the case of Somaliland nowadays, how does the Latin script works? And if there are huge differences between the dialect in Somaliland and in the rest of Somalia. The second question of Yosran is, in the case of the Somali population in Ogaden, Ethiopia, they also adopted the Latin script for writing after maybe 1972. And Leonardo Gutierrez says, an excellent presentation, sir. I have some question. How mutually intelligible are the Somali dialects, since Somalia is currently a failed state? In the last 30 years, have regional differences in the language increased? And another question, Somali belongs to the Cushitic subfamily in the Afro-Asiatic family. is there any intelligibility with other Cushitic languages, such as Oromo in Ethiopia?
Thank you. Yes. Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, I heard all the questions.
We will write in the chat. Okay.
Okay, I'm taking a few answers briefly, starting from the easy one is about Ogaden. By the way, Ogaden is not the name of an area, a country. Again, is the name of people. It's a plural and is the Ogaden clan, but this tells you that everything is clan in this country. Yes, the script was adopted also by the Somali people in Ogaden. It was accepted, well, at the beginning, there were no other official languages in Ethiopia apart from Amharic, but then it was accepted by the communist government in the 80s, and then by the new government in Ethiopia. Remember that according to the new constitution, 1994, each community has the right to develop its own script and its own language. So in the case of the Somali, they are one of the 11 or 12, I don't remember, regional states. It's called Somali regional state. And they use the same alphabet. And also the same alphabet is used in Djibouti, although in Djibouti the official language is French and Arabic, but not the local language of the people. And so, yes, there are no problems. Everybody uses this script. Nowadays, they also use it a little bit. I saw it only in the internet to write the local dialects in the south. The new constitution, this is maybe as an answer to the first question, the local, the dialects in the south. The new constitution adopted last year, and of course it's a kind of a failed state, so it's not really implemented, but in any case it recognizes Somali as the official language, the only official language apart from Arabic, as we said, in two varieties. The variety of the north, they use a different terminology, that is the normal Somali we've been speaking about. And one, the main variety of the south, Mai. So Mai is recognized as an official variety of Somali. It's very ambiguous. Do they understand each other? To speak honestly, I don't know, and nobody knows because nobody did the calculation. Probably not. That is, if you take somebody, a pastoral nomad Somali from the north, he has many problems in understanding the language of the agriculturalist. And probably a few of these dialects of the south are separate languages from a linguistic point of view. And at the same time, I can give the answer to the third question that is about the Cushitic languages. There are similarities, but no, they do not understand each other with Oromo and other groups. Most similarity is with a few small languages in Kenya. Rendille is a language spoken in northern Kenya by a few tens of thousands and is very, very similar to Somali. It could be called Somali, and they don't call it because they consider themselves a different people, and they are different people. With Oromo, and especially with the language to the north, that is the language of Djibouti, the other language of Djibouti, Afar. I mentioned this Afar thing in the last slide. There is much more similarity. Many words are similar. We mentioned just one, the word for white, but there are thousands of them. The grammar at the same time is very different. So no, there is no similarity, but there is no intelligibility. But by the way, there is no intelligibility, not even between the Romance languages, between Italian and Spanish and Portuguese, and they are much more similar than the Cushitic languages. So apart from points of grammar and typology that are interest to linguists, no, there is no similarity. And I don't remember the first question.
Would you see the questions in chat?
Yeah.
In chat, please.
The first question was about intelligibility.
Yes.
I didn't understand very well. Thanks for the greetings from Guatemala City. I don't know anybody there. The first question, yes, was about intelligibility, but also, Tom, can you read it again?
Yeah, from Yoslan.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. In the case of Somaliland nowadays, how does the Latin script works? And if there are huge difference between the dialect in Somaliland and in the rest of Somalia? It's the first question.
Okay. The difference is not based upon Somaliland or Italian Somalia. It's based upon the original clan groups. So you don't see any difference between the two sides of the former border, or also the new border, because Somaliland pretends to be a separate country, but you see difference within the Somalia itself between the language of the nomads, center north, and the language of the agriculturalists, the south. So in this case, there is some difference. I wouldn't say huge difference, but some difference. At the same time, remember that everybody accepts the Somali language, official Somali language, because it was, even before the government and Somalia, it was the language of poetry and the language of communication. So also the people in the south use the Somali language, which comes from the north, in interdialect communication. Yeah. So Somaliland and Italian formerly Italian Somalia do not have a bearing on dialects. The dialects, if you see the maps, the dialects run across the country. Also remember that either British Somaliland and Italian Somalia were very much artificial constructs. I mean, yes, actually many thousands Italian went to Somalia in the 20s and 30s, but the colonial government did not have much of an effect on the life of everyday people. I mean, the real influence for a long time, the real influence of Italia stopped just England of Mogadishu. For many years, they didn't go England because there was nothing to do, first thing. And the second thing was that the Somali were not very keen of having Italians around. So it was basically an official thing. And the British Somaliland was mainly, well, actually, no, this was an official policy. They occupied the British Somaliland in order to protect Aden on the other side of the Gulf. Aden was important as a strategic harbor, and they did not want the French or the Italian to be on the other side. So they occupied the British Somaliland, but they did not care about Somaliland at all, and did not ever gain £1 from British Somaliland. It was probably the most useless of all the British colonies.
Good. I'll read.
There are sorry, Tommy. Yeah, they say if there are, probably part of the question is if there are differences between now the Somali in Somalia and the Somali abroad in the diaspora. And this is an interesting question. There are a few developments also in the written language that points to some difference. Of course, Somali, the second generation of Somali now in the United States are perfectly bilingual in English. Sometimes they use English. There have been a few novels. A very good novel, for example, was published in Toronto in Canada, and it's one of the best ones. Apparently, it's just a common Somali. But the spoken language of the Somali abroad is under the influence of English, yes. I say of English because we have many Somali living in the United Kingdom, in Liverpool, many of them are, in Seattle, and in the first center of Somali migration, if I'm not mistaken, is Minneapolis. Maybe Minneapolis, yes, and then many in Canada. But of course, there are many Somali also in Scandinavia, a few of them in Italy, and so on and so forth, yes. We can say, what we studied is that we can say that certain old words, loans from Italian are being replaced by loans from English and or Arabic. Also Arabic, don't forget Arabic, because Arabic keeps being very important, because many Somali works in Saudi Arabia, many become rich in Saudi Arabia, many go back and carry money in Saudi Arabia. There are many investments from the Gulf and from Saudi Arabia in Mogadishu. So Arabic probably is more influential now than in the past.
May I repeat the second question from Leonardo Gutierrez? Another question is, Somali belongs to the Cushitic subfamily in the Afroasiatic family. Is there any intelligibility with other Cushitic languages, such as Oromo in Ethiopia?
Yeah, I answered to this shortly. Yeah, no, there is no intelligibility. There are a few similar things. Yes, there are many similar things between French and Spanish, but there is no intelligibility. It's a bit the same thing, but there is more difference. There is more difference.
¿Hay otros comentarios, preguntas? Okay, thank you very much for your four lectures, Mauro. We appreciate it, and I wish you have a good trip back. Nice trip back to Italy. Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Arturo, do you have some question?
Oh, only to give my regards and appreciation to Professor Tosco. Fortunately, we couldn't have more time of conversation, but it's interesting what you have mentioned is very similar the case to other African languages with have software transcriptions, use of other, how can I say, scripts. And this is very interesting to reflect about how rich or complex can be the Somali language and the dialect. So thank you very much for sharing this knowledge. And I join with my colleagues that I wish you that you have a good time here, and hopefully help you in other occasions soon.
Yes, thank you, Arturo. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the students, Satomi and Emily. And yeah, it was a good time, and I would like to come back, I must say, and maybe to discuss in due time. Now I have to go back to Italy and teach in Italy, but in due time, why not? I would like to discuss, especially because I think that there is the need of more cooperation and more work together between social scientists and linguists and experts in literature and these kind of things. And we do not have much. We do not have much in Italy, sadly, and there is a need for much more exchange of ideas. So thank you very much. Thank you,
Oh,
everybody.
welcome.
You are always welcome, Mauro.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all. So
Bye.
goodbye.
Have a good work and time. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.